All the best, everyone.
So, hi, my name is Thom Dennis, and I'm the CEO of Serenity in Leadership, which is a culture change and executive coaching consultancy. This is the third panel event we're hosting on topical but possibly difficult issues. This one's called the DEI Backlash. And why have we chosen that? Well, as a facilitator and executive coach, I've witnessed pushback and resistance whenever an organization has tried to change. If you think of the reaction to the Harvey Weinstein scandal, it led to the renaissance of the hashtag #MeToo movement. And then the murder of George Floyd led to the reigniting of the Black Lives Matter movement. This was a sort of a gathering of public outrage and a demand for change. But over time, this has turned partially and given way to a kind of pushback, with these movements being challenged as somehow neoliberal nonsense. There's an increased scrutiny around DEI initiatives that you probably all will have seen or heard, and certainly the NHS is a good example where the government has pushed back on that. There's a kind of tension now between those who see such initiatives as somehow wrong and those who see that actually inclusion needs to underpin any change project if it's to be successful. So I'm joined by a wonderful panel of professionals, and I'll just introduce them briefly. Gamal, or G, his journey has been described in the BAFTA award-winning film, The Black Cop. He was awarded a positive role model at the National Diversity Awards in 2022, and more recently, he gave a superb talk on intersectionality, which is on the Serenity Leadership YouTube channel. Today, G continues to shape the future of DEI with his talks and exercises in a variety of organizations. Rob's parents came over to the UK as part of the second wave of Windrush. He spent 35 years in the civil service and was awarded an OBE in 2018 for services to race equality across the civil service and in the community. He says he uses his life experiences to help fight racial injustices, both in life and through his workplace. Toni's a seasoned professional, serving as a critical friend and business mentor to C-suite leaders and board members in social and public interest sectors. With a background in behavioral sciences and applied criminology, she founded the Compassionate Organization Framework and Leadership Model, emphasizing compassion and DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Toni is renowned for her expertise in justice, social impact, and mobility. She's affectionately known as the Queen of Compassion, with her impact being described as Toni's fairy dust. And Marsha. Marsha's a globally recognized DEI strategist and the founder-director of Unheard Voice Consultancy. Her innovative culture change methodology has earned international acclaim, including awards from the UN-backed International Federation of Training and Development Organization and the Brandon Hall Group. Marsha also serves as the executive director of EDI for Building People, CIC, having previously been the inaugural Director of Inclusion and Diversity at the Royal Institute of British Architects. Marsha is a highly regarded thought leader with the Cultural Intelligence Centre and has a rich background in broadcasting. So I invite each of you now just to share your perspective on the current state of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in the workplace, and how you perceive the concept of backlash within this context. Marsha, do you want to start off on that?
Well, the current state of it is in flux, I think we can all agree. I think to your point about the seizing of a moment, whatever that might be, tragic deaths normally and horrendous outcomes for women, these moments have been seized. We've created a movement and we've started to build some of that momentum to be able to create change. But I think essentially, like with a lot of these issues, these needs to fundamentally create societal change, they're not smooth, they're not easy, they're not straightforward. And I think this is what we're experiencing at the moment, a political narrative that is seeking to divide in order to push back. And that is purely a sort of the kind of response that you get from any kind of problem like this being creating change. You get a bit of pushback, but it's at this time those of us with proper expertise and with effective consideration of all the issues need to keep pushing forwards, because we can't afford not to.
Thanks, Marsha. Toni.
Hi, thank you so much. Well, I'm just going to start off by saying that everyone wants change, yet no one wants to change, because we're all looking at each other. Everyone's looking at, it's going to start over there. So, but really, this needs to start at the top. There was a report that was produced in the UK in March 24 that highlighted the changes that were needed to be made. And there were 72 listed, of which only 24 had been completed up until April last year. And I believe that this is more of a systemic thing. It's institutionalized at the very top. And if I can, Tom, I'd just like to give you a few examples of this that I think the wider public are really just ignoring, because when we think about DEI, it's not just about race. Yeah. However, there are some things that we do need to consider. They are Windrush, Brexit, George Floyd, the Oprah interview, COVID, the Met Police Casey report, the London Fire Brigade report that followed very closely afterwards, the BBC with a famous sports presenter, the ITV with another presenter, the monarchy with Where Do You Come From? And, now we're in a state of influx, as Marsha has highlighted, because what we've got a prime minister of colour that seems to have divided the public. So it's really interesting that the little things that we're trying to do within the organisations, we really need to think about this. Is there something really broader and bigger across British institutions? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. G.
It's interesting because I look at this and I think a lot of the scenarios that Toni just mentioned, right, they come from a very reactive place. And I think that what we're having is, when you're operating from a place of reactiveness, the only defense to that is defensiveness. And I think that what we've done is we've created this rigidity of attack and defend. Right? And what we don't have is enough people in that space, enough qualified people in that space to be able to break down some of those barriers. And it's to look at why is there a backlash as opposed to attacking the backlash, if that makes sense. Right? Is it driven by fear? Is it driven by a lack of awareness? Is it driven by a lack of understanding? Is it driven by systematic issues? There's so many questions that need to be asked. And I think to have one answer, to say this one answer fits everything, can be very narrow-minded. It creates more of the problem.
Yeah. Yes, I think we live in a society where people are looking for the simple answer, and these things aren't simple, but we don't seem to have the time to look at them properly. Rob.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tom, and thanks to all my friends on this panel. I look at the panel and I'm so excited to be here on the panel because I love everyone on this panel and I've done bits of work with each of you. Thanks for those who have hopped on as well and listening in. I'm going to pick up on something I heard G say, actually, because my view around some of this backlash is to try and understand, well, firstly, what is backlash? What is it in essence? In essence, it's a resistance to change. And if you look at some of the classic resistance to change, you will see things like the fear of the unknown. And it can be demonstrated in a range of ways, including xenophobia, where it's, a fear of things unknown. But the loss of control, bad timing, not now, we can do that next year, mistrust, concerns about competence. Economic factors get played into the narrative. Satisfaction with the status quo. People not wanting to give things up. People not wanting to give up power. You know, I once heard it said, I think it was the Reverend Al Sharpton said, power is never freely given. It must be taken or won. And it strikes me that there's a lot going on at the moment that is to do with classic forms of resistance to change, because certain people in positions of power don't want to give up that power. They don't want to lose out in their own minds and perspective. And so they will introduce fake news, false equivalence. They will mislead in order to retain their position, their power. And I think all of these things add up to, at times, a concentrated and coordinated backlash. At other times, it's an instinctive response. It's a no, I'm not moving from where I am. You're going to stay there. I'm going to stay here, and we're going to keep the two separated. And when we really look at the heart of it, what does the backlash actually mean? It's people wanting to hang on to their position and their power. And I think that's what's sent a lot of people running in a certain direction.
Yeah.
If I can pick up on that, actually, just to marry, if I can, the point that Rob's just made and the point that Toni was making, because Toni said, the change needs to start at the top, and talked about, we have a Prime Minister of colour here in the UK, and I don't love to tell the story, but I always find it quite amusing that one of the key front benchers in the UK government, up until recently, up until November 2023, was a woman called Suella Braverman. She was the Home Secretary, and she and I actually went to the same school at the same time. So
you say that in public?
Well, the thing is, the point that I make is, just because someone looks a certain way, was educated in a certain way, had very similar backgrounds, doesn't mean that they're going to behave inclusively, put it that way. And so identity representation is one thing, but inclusion is a completely different, kettle of fish, as we all know. And I think the point about starting at the top is really important, but starting at the top and starting with introspection. What is it about me? What is it about my leadership team? What is it about my organization that needs to change so we could be more inclusive of you, whoever you are? Because, of course, we're all made up to multiple identities. And so that's why I tend to say that inclusion isn't about other people and their identities. It's about us and our behaviors. And this is to your point, G, about the effectiveness, is, are we really looking at the behavioral change and the inclusion piece of the work, which, to Rob's point, is going to build a bridge between those, varying perspectives. Inclusion isn't about everyone agreeing. It's about accepting that we're human. Every single person on this planet is human. Okay, that's the starting point. And we have all these cultural differences, because very few of our differences are biological, by the way. The vast majority of them are cultural. So how do we bridge our cultural differences through understanding, through communication, through strategizing and planning carefully, and creating those procedural changes to mitigate bias. And it's in there that we find the efficacy of our work. And it's through the efficacy then we can remove some of that backlash. But unfortunately, with some of the seizing of the moment to create a movement, we've ended up with a lot of knee-jerk reaction, shall we say, the hiring of people who are clearly not qualified to do this work. Their work is pretty ineffective. And so there's fuel for this backlash. They're saying, look, we hired these people, they look a certain way, they tick the box, and it's not working. So we're not going to do it anymore.
So
can I come in there, Tom?
Yes. I was going to segue, but go on.
Yeah, because I loved where this discussion is going. I mean, my fear, I had a fear coming into this, and I'll be honest, but it's now dissipated. And my fear was it's sometimes the language can be, it's about the group, it's about the characteristic, right? And it isn't, it's about the behavior. And it's also about the question of when we look at race, when we look at gender, when we look at LGBT issues, it's about understanding the issues of the minority group or the underrepresented group or stuff like that. I've done some work with a guy called Lee Manoir, who did a thing called The Color of Fear. But there's a question that is never asked in this space, right? And I ask it in rooms, and it always gets this stony silence. And they're asking, tell me what it feels like to be white. What does being white mean? Because you want to understand where I'm coming from. But, going to what Marsha said, we need to understand where we're all coming from in the first place. What do I bring to the table? Not only in terms of my experience, but in terms of my own prejudices, in terms of my own biases. And how does that cloud this debate? How does that cloud this? So I can see Tony's on the edge.
Yeah, I just want to jump in there. Can I, Tom?
Yeah, go on, Tony.
Can I? I think it's absolutely great what Gee's actually saying and where he's taking this conversation. Because actually, recently there was something that said around whether the Prime Minister should have lived experience. There was a big debate about that just last week. Should we have somebody that knows and has experience to be able to qualify? Because so that's really interesting in relation to G and bringing that lived experience in. If I could just jump back just really quickly in terms of Marsha, you were saying about when I said about the starting at the top. Yes, I did say that, and maybe I should have clarified and said that for me, making that statement, it's more about role modeling. Yeah, that's really where I was going with that. Because change can start anywhere, but really it's about role modeling at the top. So I just wanted to clarify that. And with Rob, what you were saying about the power, so much of it comes into ego as well, which is where you were alluding to. And one of the things that I say is you don't become more powerful by holding on and clutching your power. You become more powerful by using it, giving it away to empower others. Because we know that the agenda right now is about two things: leading, people, and sustainability. So there's no way that this DEI agenda can go off. It can't slip off the agenda because it's about people and sustainability. Those are the two leading things at the moment. Thank you for that.
So I want to segue into the
bring us back.
But
good luck with that.
We've to think it was me that gathered you lot together.
Just for the record, this is the point.
I'm just thinking about Rob's point, and you've all sort of built on it in a way around power. And for me, the fundamental skill that's needed for leaders of the future is self-awareness. And so I think there's so many people who don't know. I mean, to your point, G, when you ask someone, what does it feel like to be white? It's like that doesn't compute in a sense because of the way that us white people have been brought up. And it's this whole thing about what is normal, this fundamental sort of definition of what is normal. And it's the majority that defines what is normal. And therefore, everything that isn't normal through those eyes is somehow different or in many respects wrong and threatening. And that's where the whole thing about power comes in, because I need to retain the power to stay safe. So
can I say something to Tom? I want to give an example that kind of highlights some of what you're saying. After George Floyd, one of the things that I noticed is that there were a lot of senior leaders in organizations who were being told they need to do things differently. but they didn't have anyone to talk to say, I don't get this. They were scared to say, I don't get this. Anyway, I lead it to this story. A particular organization, I won't say which one, I was contacted by the head of the organization, said that we've got one of our senior leaders here who is being very disparaging around the Black Lives Matter movement and people taking the knee. And they said, could you have a chat with him? And I was like, okay, I've never done one-on-one work like this before, but I'll give it a go. Let's see what happens. So I said, the only criteria I have is the conversation between him and I will be private. Whether I have got permission to share this story. So I met with this guy and I said, okay, where do you want to start? And he said, I want to start with white privilege. And I said, okay, tell me about it. And he goes, I don't agree with it. I think it's wrong, da, 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 da. I think it's divisive. So I said, I took him through a couple of exercises. And at the end of it, he's like, oh, I never saw it from that perspective before. And I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go away now and have a conversation with people about what you've learned from this session. And then next week, we'll talk about that. So he comes back the following week. And I said, how did it go? He says, oh, well, I chatted with Tunde, had a great conversation with Tunde. Then I chatted with Sunita. We had a great conversation. Then I chatted with Errol. And I said, sorry, can I ask you a question? He said, yes. Yeah. Were all of those people of color? And he said, yeah. I said, well, I'm not happy with that.
Yeah.
I said, I need you to go and chat to white people. And he goes, oh, yeah, I get that. Okay, yeah. So he went away. Came back the following week. I said, how did it go? He said, well, we were having our senior management meeting and I brought it to the meeting. He said, for 2.5 hours, we were sitting down there having a chat. He said, it was great. I said, okay. I said, can I just ask a question? He said, yes. I said, who was in charge of that meeting? He said, well, I was. So I said, you were in a position of power then when you were having a conversation. He goes, yes. I said, well, I'm not happy with that. I want you to have this conversation with your mates in the pub or on the golf course or at a dining dinner table. And he suddenly stopped and he goes, oh, that's going to be, I said, now we're at the edge. This is where it is. This is the coal face.
Yeah.
It took him 6 weeks to have one conversation with one person.
Yeah.
And he came back and he said, I think I've lost a friend.
Yeah.
And I said, this is what this stuff is about.
Yes. Yeah.
And getting the skills, having the skills to take people to that edge and hold them there safely and support them through that, through the discomfort is the challenge. I think a lot of the times we get to the discomfort and we back away.
The self-efficacy is not there. Yeah. Tom, may I add to that?
Yeah, please. I think the first question was about leaders. What is their role in all of this? And we're right in that. So go for it.
Yeah, I just want to echo something I'm hearing G say. And G, put me right if I've misheard you. But there's something about the corner we turn when the perceived victim need not be present, but somebody in that space speaks up on behalf of them. The perceived victim may not be in that space, but somebody, for the sake of humanity, will speak up on their behalf. And I want to return to this issue of power. And I want to underline the point I'm trying to make about power. When we look at, and I'm really not trying to make a political point, not a party political point when I say this, but just look at some of what's happening. Depending on who in this part of the world gets into political power on the 5th of July when we wake up, it's possible that the Equality Act as we know it may go.
That's right. Yeah.
That legislation may go. It's already been muted. It's already started to be spoken about. And my point about power is, and I think it was Lord Acton that first said it, but power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when we are linked to behaviors, something my sister Marsha said earlier, when we start looking at behaviors, often, not always, but often it's the desire for power that drives the behavior. And when we live in a land where the practices, the policies and the procedures are drafted and scripted by servants of the government of the day, we need to be aware of the power that there is in that. Do you know, if you go into a government department in the UK today, you cannot use the term white privilege. It's vetoed. You can't use it. You can't use the term unconscious bias anymore. That's the nature of the backlash, folks. You can't say microaggressions. You have to say micro behaviors. Everything is being written by, and the narrative is being drafted by those who are in power. And the impact it has is that for those brave souls who would want to do something in this space, the individuals that we're talking to that will go back and reach out to their Tristrans and their Michaels and their Stephens next to them, they become scared. They're scared to break ranks. And so, further to the wonderful Leroy Logan's book, Closing Ranks, you get the system holding people prisoner. And that's why you get the stupidness around lanyards and all of that.
But then
rubbish.
what you have to do, Rob, is right. That's the work. The work is, how do you help those people who are afraid to break ranks to break ranks? How do you support them?
So
I think,
sorry, no, go, Tony.
yeah, no, all I was just going to say was, up until recently, if you looked up the word British values that was in our curriculum, it used the word tolerate.
Tolerance.
That's right, which is put up with. So this is what we're contending with, really. And when you think about, this difficult conversations, why are we calling it difficult conversations? You build relationship. It's just another conversation. Yeah. So we've got this. So if you call it a difficult conversation, guess what? It's going to be difficult. And just going back to what G was saying, it's like, because I quite often say to people that, look, you might be uncomfortable, but it's about respect of each other and the fact that you may not agree. You may come out a bit bloodied and wounded, but do you know what? Expect it, because it's not all going to be had in one conversation. It's going to be several over time as you build a relationship and get to know each other. But I think people go into these conversations expecting an outcome after one conversation.
Yeah.
Without getting bloodied. Got a bruise, I'm wounded. Let me back out. And it needs a different mindset, an open mindset. Sorry, Marsha, I know that you want to kind of come in there. Sorry,
yeah, because Tom's not going to. No, Tom's not going to get on asking a question, poor lad.
Tom can leave.
Bye, Tom. What I was going to say is, like, to all of your points, there's a quote that I tend to use that Paulo Freire, Adam Rutherford, others have used it, is that when all you have ever known is privilege, equality feels like oppression. And it's to that point, feeling bloodied when that you're being asked to look at yourself, do that introspective piece of work. And another quote from Gruner and Whitaker 2015 is, the culture of any organization, and this is to your point, Tony, the culture of any organization is shaped by the worst behaviors a leader's willing to tolerate. And so to flip it to your point, G, I tend to say the culture of any organization is shaped by the best behaviors leader is willing to demonstrate. And so what are those behaviors? Yes, it's about entering into those conversations. And actually something, Tony, you've just made me think, because I produced a resource called Having Challenging Conversations, which is about how do you raise, when you're facing microaggressions, when you're facing poor behaviors at work, how do you raise those? How do you get your leaders to listen, and also for leaders to look at that and understand how they should be listening differently and taking the truth, those things. But I'm going to change the title of that to Having Necessary Conversations, because they are necessary. And if we frame them in the terms of difficult and challenging, then definitely we're going to frame it in a way that starts it off in the back foot. So thank you. We're going to do that.
Avoid the conversation, according to G as well. Yeah. So
I just want to. My technology is not working for the LinkedIn comments, but I'm being passed some of them. And Ali over in Austin, in Texas, I think, She says, my sense is that unifying mission, vision, and value for the DEI effort has lost focus. All effective change requires an articulated vision. My sense is that we've lost that to the challenge of change execution. We have lost enrollment. I think that's a very relevant comment.
It's very relevant, very relevant. I think in any
But there's
strategy,
also
and we've got to see. Yeah, I mean, I would just, if I can, sorry, G, just for a moment.
no, sorry, I was interrupting. Carry on, Marsha.
That you know that inclusion is a strategy. It's got to be approached, you know, in terms of trying to bring people along with their behaviours and thinking about how those policies, procedures, and practices, and making sure that they are embedded across, you know, all our systems. We need a strategic approach to mitigate bias and make sure that we can get there. And absolutely agreed. And the way you start any strategy is with vision, mission, and purpose. And so I actually highly agree with that comment. And I ask all leaders to tell me, you know, what is your vision? What is it you're trying to achieve with this work? How can we set it off in the right frame so that you understand what is actually necessary here, and you can be drawn back to this is the purpose that you're trying to achieve. When things do get sticky, and they will get sticky, and they will get icky, and you will get defensive. But remembering this will allow you to lean into that defensiveness, because you have a choice when you feel defensive, don't you? You can either lean in or you can walk away. If you walk away, you'll be no better off than when you started. But when you lean in, you know that you'll learn and grow. And so that's why I don't tend to say get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I tend to say, you know, lean into your discomfort, because I think if we're getting comfortable, we're probably getting complacent.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that vision, you know, vision's a very interesting word. Like a lot of the words that are used in this space, you know, it's how we interpret them. And I think, you know, it's one thing to say we need to have a vision, but I think we need to define the vision. There needs to be a very clear definition of what vision means and what that vision is about. You know, you could say that it's about respect, but then I can give you 5 different people from 5 different groups and say, give me a definition of respect, and they'll all give me a very different definition, right? So we've got to understand that there's a fluidity here that we have to learn to work with as well, right? And the fluidity should be part of that vision. If it's a vision that people can't understand and can't buy into, then is it a vision?
Yeah. Can I just take it one step further back, if possible, Tom?
Go
That's
for it.
really, because when I think about vision, mission, and values in organizations, I come back to purpose, because quite often they start the work and then they realize that they have to revisit their purpose and their values. So instead of starting off there, we have to do a little bit of work before and then we have to go back. So really, I kind of think about it, what is your purpose? What are you trying to do? And then the vision, the mission, and the values, you know, kind of come into it from there. And quite often it's because the purpose isn't clear.
Yeah.
Yes, the why.
That's kind of where
The why.
The why.
Yeah.
Exactly. The why.
Well, I think in my experience, purpose is actually a concept that is relatively new. People were talking about missions and values and all that. They've been doing that for ages. But the concept of purpose is much more recent. And I think a lot of organizations, when you ask them what their purpose is, they just talk about making money. They don't see beyond that. You know, what is their role in society, and what is their impact on the environment and the people who work for them. And I think it's really important the way the younger generations coming into work now are much more interested in what is this about. You know, I want to have a role in the world. I want to feel like I'm making a difference, even if it's a very small thing in a microcosm. But I need to feel that sense, which actually gives me a sense of belonging, which is one of the most fundamental needs, I think, in all this. And you've got people at the top of organizations for whom, you know, they were brought up in a different world, and this just does not compute. So there's a real dissonance there that creating a tension.
Well, I think that organizations can try and fight off the DEI. However, it's going to keep coming back to them, not only to bite them,
Yeah.
but it will keep coming back. Because when you think about the sustainability and the people agenda, the leading strategies are around corporate social responsibility, environmental, social and governance, sustainable development goals,
Yeah, they're not going
DEI.
away.
They're all drawn back to, sorry, I'm doing the hand signals here, but they're all come back to people. How
Yeah.
can you move forward with that? Even the sustainable development goals, it's got equality in there because there's some goals around equality. So they can't move far from it, really.
I think it's also about, I think, listen to this, sometimes we spend more time talking about characteristics than we do talking about character.
Interesting.
There's a woman called Dr. Donna Hicks who's done this talk about dignity, the essential elements of dignity. I think I've spoken to Tom about this before. And what I like, and there was another professor, I've forgotten this professor's name in America, who I did some work with. And one of the things they talked about is that we talk about trying to understand the characteristics of people when we should be talking about how we understand character. Right? We talk about, okay, you need to understand what it's like to be race, for example. You need to understand what it's like to be black. I mean, I'm a black guy. I'm 61. I'm still asking myself what it means to be black. So if I'm still asking myself, how can I expect you to understand? But what we can understand, let's talk about, okay, what does marginalization look like? What does dignity mean? Let's talk about the things that we can understand, the things that can bring us together into that inclusive space and challenge. You say to a group, has anybody been marginalized? And everybody puts their hand up. I say, that's what we're talking about. How do we get to a point where nobody in the room will put their hand up?
Yeah, I think that's probably the common experience of all humans. We could all point to a time when we felt excluded. We can all point to a time when we felt like we're not wanted, that we were, put aside or shunned in some kind of way. And I don't think that there are many people who would want to be responsible for that kind of behaviour for others. And so when we draw on our common humanity, this is usually a useful way to start to address these issues of backlash, because we still need to do this work. And to your point, Tony, we still need to have that effectiveness. There are all these reasons why, business reasons, if that's the extrinsic motivator for any leader in any organization, is okay, the bottom line. Now I have to say, always sticks in my throat to talk about the business case for DEI, EDI, because it's are you trying to put a monetary value on my existence, my right to thrive? But I think this is where you have to be pragmatic sometimes, and as much as it does stick in my throat to say, well, actually, when you place value on people, when you allow them to thrive, when you give them the opportunity to engage in a way where they can really do their best work, where they can fully express themselves and extend their legs, then absolutely you're going to get the bottom line outcome that you're looking for anyway. And of course, no one has yet shown me the business case for the status quo in comparison, I have to say. And maybe you have.
Because I think some of it, Tom, is about understanding those behaviours, really, like what G highlighted. And I see organisations are really, we value our staff. How can you value your staff? It's more about, do your staff feel valued? So are you an organisation that values your staff, or you're an organisation where staff feel valued? Difference. And until we get to that part of it, that it is a person-centred piece, it doesn't matter what you do, what you throw at anything. If that person doesn't feel valued, then you're not doing it, it's not working. So that's part of the measurement, isn't it?
So how do you measure, isn't it? That's the thing is, and this has anybody heard of a guy called Rory Sutherland, the PR guru who does this thing? He says, we fail to recognize intangible value. right? Which is value that you can't measure. And a lot of this stuff around the EDI world is intangible value.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did an interview with Dean Carter, I don't know, about 2 months ago. He used to be the HR director of Patagonia. And one of the things he said in this latest interview, he said, whenever I'm challenged around this stuff, I say to them, have you got an ROI on the car parking space? It's costing you a fortune, but are you looking at that? No, it's the intangibles which people just kind of avoid. So how can organizations effectively address and navigate the resistance?
You know what?
There's your
We're
answer.
40 minutes in, and we've not yet mentioned cultural intelligence. So I think
Shame on
this,
you.
this is something
But we have,
yes,
Marsha. We've just not used those words.
Yeah, well, you're
exactly. No, I
Marsha.
mean, I mean, the thing is, cultural intelligence is the actual definition of it, the capability to work and relate effectively across cultural difference. It's got a couple of decades of research behind it, which shows that if you behave with 4 key capabilities, you improve it, you practice it, you keep on learning and developing, then you will behave inclusively. And then when you build that into an organization, that organization can become more inclusive. And the 4 capabilities of cultural intelligence is drive, your motivation. Do you actually want to work and relate effectively across difference? And, to the points we've already been made, a lot of people say they want to. But when you feel fear, when you feel discomfort, when you feel defensive, it stops you from progressing. And so a really key piece here is that motivation. How do you use your intrinsic, extrinsic motivators, but also your self-efficacy, your confidence? You're going to make mistakes. We all make mistakes, every single one of us. I always call out my own, internal racism, misogyny, homophobia, and just to recognize that we're all biased. And so being able to lean into that discomfort and learn and grow from it, hugely important, because I like to think that I'm relatively high in that CQ drive and that efficacy. And then knowledge, what do we need to know about a lot of difference, not just values, but all the different business systems, the way different businesses work, different languages, different leadership styles, strategy. How do we mitigate our bias? How do we build in and plan for that difference? Being able to create procedural changes to mitigate it, being hugely self-aware, to Tom's point about that leadership self-awareness piece, and checking our assumptions. And then ultimately, for people judge us on our behaviors, and people, leaders, organizations that are high in CQ action have this broad repertoire of adaptable behaviors that they can use to be effective at working and relating across that cultural difference. And the research has shown, it's proven, that when you behave with cultural intelligence, and it is a very conscious choice, unless we are consciously behaving with inclusion, we're likely unconsciously behaving with exclusion. And so it's really important that we have these frameworks that already exist, and we build on them, and we navigate them and try to bring them into our organizations, because they can prevent something like a DEI backlash.
Rob, what's your take on all this?
Well, I'm in love with CQ. I think it's the secret sauce. I think CQ is what you can sprinkle on your IQ and EQ to really whack up the contrast button and make sense in this modern world. I think the only thing I'd add to what my sister Marsha has said is that when it comes to CQ strategy, it's not enough to declare your intention. It's not enough to have a strategy. You must publish it and make sure you're accountable. If it matters, measure it. If it really matters, publish it. And I think too many organizations, going back to the whole power thing, too many organizations get inside the law, fracture the law, and stay just the right side of the law, or even just the wrong side of the law, to make sure that they don't have to comply with what they have to do. But I absolutely stand alongside Marsha on not just the whole curiosity and the appetite for change. How often do we see senior leaders put themselves in the way of difference, to put themselves to catch difference, to encourage, promote, inspire difference? How often do we really see that? Really, how often do we see anyone in the organization with responsibility building the knowledge base of that organization, or indeed senior leadership teams, to actually expand the knowledge, to actually grow what we know about each other, and to spend time with each other, to actually exchange those cultural differences and to appreciate the wonderful richness of our differences that we all have culturally. And I think when you see organizations walking on a path to doing more of that, you see the results coming through, you see the difference, and you can see them taking full advantage of the richness of difference that they have in their midst. And I think that's what's important. So it's not, CQ isn't instead of IQ, it's not better than EQ. CQ is the secret sauce that makes sense of all of those quotients.
When Rob was mentioning about how leaders manage this, I was kind of wincing at because I felt it, every single one that you said, because it's something that I've witnessed. And I also think as well that when people are coming forward, the good, bad and the ugly, we just need to encourage it, because if we snap back, they retract, and we need to get it out. That's the first.
They close ranks, and they're good at closing ranks, Tony. They're good at defending each other and keeping each other where they need to be. That's part of what sustains the backlash.
I think there's another level for me here when I was listening to this, and there's the level of, first of all, I need to know that I don't know. I need to understand what not knowing, not understanding means. Right? Because otherwise it becomes an expectation that if I don't know that I don't know, how am I going to meet this expectation?
But I think,
and if I have this expectation put upon me, my only way of dealing with that is to shut down or become defensive.
I know. And G, that is a beautiful thing right there. And I'm by your side on it. I think the challenge, G, with what you've just described is that there are many, many senior leaders and C-suite occupants who won't want to demonstrate that vulnerability.
And that's the key there. That's the key there. So and this is why I go back to, we need people with the right skills to be able to manage that. Because if you have the right skills and you're an experienced facilitator, that's what you're working with.
Exactly.
And this is exactly the point.
What's happened over the years, you've seen a lot of people come into this space claiming to be experts, claiming to be facilitators. And what they're actually doing is making these things worse. They're pushing people into that space of, the only thing I'm going to do is shut down and defend. And
that's right. That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The only way that you can.
Yeah.
So I was just going to say to you, the only way you can demonstrate vulnerability, though, is if you feel psychologically safe. And to your point in the story you were telling earlier, G, is that you created the psychological safety for that leader to be able to be vulnerable. And so it's really important that, I would say vulnerability is when I give you the benefit of the doubt. Psychological safety is when you give me the benefit of the doubt, and really making sure that we can, and you're absolutely right, that this work is fundamentally about creating those environments where, we've got to it's okay for us. We know we make mistakes and we can hold our hands up and we know how to apologize. And, we know how to go through those processes to learn from our mistakes and do differently in future. But it can feel so difficult with some of these subjects to step on what look like hot coals, and in many cases they are.
Got to bring in the love, and it may sound like this
let's talk about
there has to be that love. We have to do this work from a place of compassion rather than attack.
And our compassion queen is right here with us.
There we go. That's why I love that.
My fairy dust ready.
So I'm telling you, love is so important. Go
sorry, just picking up on something that you were saying, because I think that really some of this is about, I was having a conversation recently with a leader, and she said, but some of the team, they haven't really got the capacity in their diaries, etc. They haven't got the flexibility, availability. I said, is it capacity or is it the willingness?
Yes.
Because this is our conversation. Yeah, unless you come in this with an open mind and some kind of openness, then it's not even going to get off the ground. So that's the thing. But I think that there's also something which you touched on, G and Marsha, about the behaviour. I feel that we need to really take time to understand behaviour in this whole mix and how it embeds from young right the way through. People think, oh, you can just change and it's just going to be a
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
Actually, if that is a behaviour
Yeah.
that's been exhibited, whether it be innate or learned habitual from young, I can't expect you to just change overnight. You got to identify the behaviour, undo it, unpick it, different strategies for different behaviours. And it's so much bigger than how it presents. So when little Johnny doesn't change, it's because you don't understand what the behaviour is that's being demonstrated.
I've got an exercise which I do in groups, and some of you may be familiar with the left hand, right hand exercise, right? Where what I do, I get everyone to write down a phrase, whatever the phrase is, and then I ask them to write it again, but with the other hand, right? And then and they always struggle, and we have a bit of a laugh about it. But I said, look, if I said to you by the end of this workshop, you must now write with your other hand, how many of you will do it? Right? Is it going to be easy to do? Right? And they're sort of like strong. And I said, but that's what we're talking about. That's the methodology, is that if you want to write with the other hand, you have to put in the work. It's not just going to happen because you've had a workshop.
And you're going to have to want to do that. There's got to be,
yes,
that you've got to see a reason, a motivation for it. There's so much energy here, and I really thank you for your points of view and so on that you're putting into this. What I'd like you to do, each of you, please, is to kind of sum up where we've got to and any messages that you want to leave for people as we go away. And just bearing in mind that we talked about the DEI backlash. And so everybody's experiencing this in one shape or form. And yet when I hear from professionals like you all, there's a sense of positivity that, and you've said it a number of times really in different ways, is this is going to go on. It will go on because there's much bigger initiatives that are just demanding that people, that there's a space that is inclusive for everybody, whatever their differences. So how do we remain strong in the face of backlash, and encourage and help and support those who are wavering or quavering in this place? Like, as we've seen, people with a particular coloured lanyard, and now that's been sort of made verboten. I mean, but how do we give them the courage and the strength, knowing that we have to go on with this, and it needs real professionals who really understand what they're doing to take this forward? Marsha, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, change is challenging, but to that point made by others earlier, that is necessary. And, facing the backlash is, somewhat inevitable. I think we've got to recognize that when we are actually creating change, we will get a backlash. And so perhaps we should look at it positively in that respect.
Yeah.
But we need to persist with efficacy and with expertise. I think if we're moving forward, please recognize if you yourself are in this work and you don't have the expertise that you should. Go and get it. Seek it from those who know better, and whether that's recognizing, things about organizational behavior, doing the psychological behavior piece, making sure that you understand about, HR policies and procedures. There are multiple ways of getting in, but you should be able to describe your praxis, your theoretical, and then how you implement it really clearly. And so, but it is tricky, it's scary, it's massive. And so I always ask people to consider the words of Martin Luther King. He said, fly. If you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But by all means, you must keep moving forward. And so when it feels sticky, when it feels icky, when it feels like you're going to turn away, remember, crawl and keep moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Rob, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm scribbling down a few notes here, Tom, inspired by what Marsha's just said, and picking up on what Tony and G were sharing earlier. I've written this down, Tom. Study commensurate with your ambition. Yeah. Don't be pushing and shoving yourself into position on this agenda without putting in the work, because there is work that needs to be done. Separate the noise from the work that needs to be done. There's a lot of noise, a lot of distraction. If I was speaking through the lens of race, I'd probably quote Toni Morrison and talk about that racism is often a distraction from what needs to be done. I appreciate that we've got a wider lens with us today, and so I'm only giving that as an example. And it's something of a rounding up for me on this. Look after yourself. We're human beings. We're not machines. We can't do this 24/7, day in, day out. Like me and G, we're old men. We're up there in years now. And whilst we might be able to travel for free in London, it's not everything. But seriously, look after yourself. Eat well, sleep well, get lots of rest. Don't become, slaves to these weapons of mass distraction all the time. Regulate that. Keep good company. As my mum taught me when I was growing up, Robert, keep good company. Discern. Keep good company. Those people will help you out when you least expect it. They'll be there for you by your side. And remember, it's always possible to invite the good in everyone that we meet. We can invite that. We might not receive it, but we can invite it.
Thank you. Tony.
Well, how can I follow on Marsha and Rob? And Rob, speak for yourself. I'm still young. All right, very young. Yeah,
I'm old.
no pass yet. Okay. So I think I'm going to kind of touch on something that G said earlier on, and that is about the knowledge and that continued learning. I think, and I've got a quote, and I say that the leaders that know everything are the ones with the most learning to do, because we never stop learning, we never stop growing, and when you stop learning, you stop growing. So that's something I want to kind of get people to grasp hold of. If you're in an organization, think about the compassionate C's, which are, coaching, community, we can't do it alone, communication, consultation, co-production, co-creation. They're all which means
Together.
with others. Picking up on something Rob said very quickly when he said, his mum said, keep good company. I've got a blend model, and it is B, behavior. Think about the behavior. L is for learning. E is for think about the environment. N is for network. Who's in your network? And my husband says, if you hang around a barber's long enough, you will end up getting your hair cut. And D is
That's
for
a black barbers,
development,
isn't
which my good colleagues have mentioned already. So the
What was
only
D, Tony?
qualification required, sorry?
What was D?
D is development, your own development, self-awareness. And I will conclude by saying the only qualification required to lead with care and compassion is to qualify as being human. Thank you.
G.
I'm going to pick up on the C words, Tony's C word. And I think that, first of all, I'd say the backlash is nothing new. Right? We had backlash in the suffragette movements. We've had backlash around race. We've had backlash
With disabilities, yeah, with disabilities, we've had it with all of them.
We've had it in so many areas. So, let's not look at this like it's something new.
It's a distraction,
right? It's part of the process. And I think what we need is people to walk beside people as they're going through this process, not to judge them for it, not to put them down for it, but to walk with them with compassion, with love, with empathy, with sympathy, and recognize that those two, or whichever, whether they're C-suite leaders or whatever, are still human beings as well. And let's do this work with compassion.
So I want to just read out one comment that was made by Femke in Holland. She says, "Dear panel, I want to acknowledge you for the way you are having this important and great conversation together. For me, it's a beautiful example of creating shared intelligence and wisdom. Thank you." And that, I think, really sums up how I feel about this. Thank you all. For those that are still with us, if you want to discuss this further, if you want some help, you've got amazing people here that you can call on. Their details are all on LinkedIn. Serenity in Leadership is here as an executive coaching organization, and we help organizations change their cultures. And that really fundamentally is what we're talking about, is bringing about a positive advancement in culture. So thank you all for attending. Thank you for being with us. And
thank you, Tom.
thank you all for all your wisdom. It's been amazing. So thank you all.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.